On this channel we have covered the highs and lows of the superheroes of Marvel Comics in the world of video games. For every Konami's X-Men Arcade and amazing Capcom crossover fighter, there's a Wolverine Adamantium Rage of the awful NES X-Men game. Much like the mutants of today's episode, Marvel games can be both a blessing and a curse, depending on how genetics have played out. As for today, we shall be covering where we last left off, looking at some of the lesser celebrated X-Men fighting games that can be experienced on the Sony PlayStation. Previously, we have already looked at X-Men Mutant Academy, a game created to be released in tandem at the same time as the year 2000's X-Men live-action movie. Despite practically never being talked about anymore, Mutant Academy is a surprisingly decent game that perhaps deserves a little more credit in the 2020s. After all, this polygonal fighter was of a good quality and sold very well. Like with most video game commercial success stories though, a sequel would soon be fast-tracked, with this cash grab in my opinion being even better than the original. So without further ado, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the story of X-Men Mutant Academy 2, another criminally underrated fighting game. Yeah. The birth of the 21st century was the first time that the X-Men had become major players in the Hollywood film industry. Before this point, they were limited to the animated adventures on the small screen, or the four-colour adventures of the comic books. The year 2000's Fox X-Men movie was both a critical and commercial darling. X-Men would only be preceded by Blade and quickly followed by Spider-Man, as the birth of the modern Marvel cinematic dominance, and would encourage the production of various other superhero movies, which would hit full steam with the arc reactor powered Iron Man movie. Thanks to licensing and crossovers, it would take years for all of the movie licenses to be under the same House of Mouse, but X-Men definitely was a catalyst, turning Marvel's fortunes drastically away from the bankruptcy they faced in the past decade. With the release of the PlayStation 2 in the previous year, the latter-day saints of the original PlayStation were mostly quick and easy budget releases and licensed titles. Titles like Madden NFL 2002 continued the series with minimal advancements. Final Fantasy Chronicles bundled earlier titles for a more budget option. And Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone would be your typical movie tie-in cash grab. While the first X-Men Mutant Academy game was created in parallel with the movie, the following year of 2001 didn't have a new X-Men film to run in parallel with. Instead, Activision and Paradox Development, who were behind the previous title, just hoped that X-Men fever was so strong that a follow-up game would sell equally as great. Releasing the successor fighting game, the Capcom route would be taken. Basically, a technically new fighter would see release, but things would be kept largely the same as before, but new characters, stages and tweaks would be added, essentially almost guaranteeing that this new game would be of higher quality than the last. This meant the game would feature the same quality action as the previous installment, with gameplay which had clearly taken a lot of inspiration from Capcom's Marvel efforts, which would certainly play out to be a good thing. Big superhero style moves, air combat and combos would all make welcome returns, along with a Capcom-esque 6-button control scheme and 2D planes to compete in. 3 punches, 3 kicks, a block, a dash, a throw, and super meters are all present in Mutant Academy 2, which means that those who are experienced in the genre will feel right at home instantaneously, and this style of play is intuitive enough to be inviting to newcomers alike. Essentially, Mutant Academy 2 features the age-old ingredients that have made fighting games popular. Easy to play, extremely difficult to master. Fighting games are fun for everyone. Street Fighter style features don't stop here either, as quarter turns and button inputs are required to pull off many moves. But like its predecessor, its super meters is where Mutant Academy games do their own thing a bit. The same system from the first game has been carried over to this one, as in each fighter has 3 bars each at the bottom of the screen, which when filled can be used to pull off different kinds of moves. One is used for more traditional super moves, whereas the second one opens up the opportunity for more of a quick time move, where you have to copy the string of button inputs that appear on the screen. The last of the 3, the Extreme meter, is also back. This one is for big attacks, which are executable when the X button symbol appears next to it. On top of all of this, there are ways to move the energy from between the meters over to other meters mid-fight, resulting in some pretty layered combat. Those who become proficient at playing this one can charge their meters separately, to pull off powerful attacks in quick succession, or if players choose to, they can space them out. The choice of strategy is yours. Pair all of this with a decent counter system, Mutant Academy 2 is even better than the surprisingly good game that came before it. This sequel would hit shelves the Tuesday following the September 11th terrorist attacks, so Americans may have been looking forward to a fair amount of distractions from the atrocious crime that had been committed against humanity. Europe, who was also rocked by this event, would see the title released in the following days, and Japan would get it the next year. Once again, the game would sell very well. While it would be great to talk about the plot at this point, unfortunately one exclusive to this game simply doesn't exist. Instead, the best we would get was a simple, basic breakdown of the mutant menace, with the manual explaining who the X-Men are and why there is a Mutant Academy in the first place. It outlines that in the X-Men Mutant Academy, each and every mutant must prove his or her worth in battle against the others. They must learn to harness their rage and utilise their individual special powers. So I guess the game has a kind of story, it's just a load of mutants testing their powers against one another. The cast of the first game would return, coming back with unique stages. Cyclops would share the New York City rooftops with a special guest who we will talk about more on later. Further from this, Beast would hone his acumen in the Danger Room, and Cajun sensation Gambit could be found in the appropriate Louisiana swamps. Magneto's back with his space base, and Wolverine can be found in the Weapon X labs, so there are thematic X-Men stages to line up somewhat with each character. The rest of the cast is fine, I guess. Mystique fighting on an airship is as appropriate as anywhere else, and Phoenix battling on the moon takes out any possible collateral damage, considering she destroyed whole galaxies in the comics. Sabretooth on an oil rig is a reason for the game to have an oil rig. Storm and Toad represent the Muir Island and Morlock sewers from the comics, so there is at least actual comic locations, which is nice. Amazingly, new characters nearly double the roster, but not the level count. Professor X takes command of a Danger Room that Beast shares, Rogue fits for the Savage Land given her infamous outfit in the world, and Havoc can be found in the X-Mansion. Nightcrawler, owing to his Catholic upbringing, can be found in the Cathedral. Lastly, and as a grab bag, Forge can be found in the desert, Juggernaut can tear up the New York City subways, and Psylocke can be found in Chandelier of the Sheer Empire? In a cool twist, it isn't just X-Men fighters who are in this one either. Continuing the trend of guest characters in the era, such as Ryo Sakazaki appearing in Fatal Fury, and Akuma in X-Men Children of the Atom, Mutant Academy 2 will find its New York-based heroes meeting a friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man on the rooftops. Voiced by Rino Romano, his actor from the period is from the show Spider-Man Unlimited. Laughably, this wouldn't be Reno's first relation with a fighting game, or even video games in general, portraying characters in the Maniac Mansion cartoon adaptation, Rain in Mortal Kombat Defenders of the Realm, and most iconically for the era, the original voice of Tuxedo Mask in the Sailor Moon dub. Wait, how does that tie into a video game? Well, a little company named Arc System Works would brush up their fighting game bona fides with fighting games based on the franchise in the 90s, so there's an additional fighting game fact for you. Knowledge is the bomb. Much like the best fighting games of the era, competent players can unlock a wealth of content to pad out this experience further. No DLC or in-game currency here, son. You need to have skills to pay the bills. Or well, unlock Swimsuit Professor X if that's your thing. In-game content includes alternate costumes for the whole cast, ending movies, and even particular characters like Psylocke and Spider-Man are hidden until players beat the game as certain fighters. Beaten Arcade mode will also provide the pool party stage and appropriate swimsuit designs for the cast, which was a hallmark of 90s Marvel Comics and the lewd era in general, to be fair. Players can use these costumes in arcade, versus and survival mode, and additional modes let players view behind the scenes concept sketches for the X-Men movie that was still in the public's mind. Critics would generally be positive for the game, with Complex placing it as the 43rd best fighting game of all time, between Pocket Fighter and Bushido Blade. Metacritic gave it a score of 72%, which was rather high for a licensed fighter. At the time, GameSpot would praise the title's graphics in particular, stating, "For those who require top-notch visuals with their gameplay, X-Men Mutant Academy 2 does not disappoint. Other than the static 2D bitmaps in the distance, each of the game's 17 arenas is colourful, large, and faithfully reminiscent of the locations from the X-Men comic book or television series. Each setting is inlaid with a decent array of splashing puddles, lumbering sentinels, swaying high-tension cables, and other such realistic glosses. Character models, with the exception of Wolverine and Juggernaut, are fluid and highly detailed, and gorgeously powerful. For some reason though, Wolverine seems overly chubby, while the gigantic Juggernaut is a tribute to muddy ugliness thanks to the inferior PSone hardware. The character cameo by Spider-Man is also a wonderful touch, as is the preview for Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, you'll earn when beating the game as him. IGN likewise would cheer on the evolution of the fighting game engine, stating, "Paradox Development has always had a knack for fighting games. X-Men Mutant Academy, Wu-Tang, Thrill Kill. And although pretty much the rest of the world has moved on to newer systems, X-Men Mutant Academy 2 has a lot to recommend about it on the PlayStation. And even though there is a certain level of cheapness from some of the characters, and enough play for newbies to jump in and play with a good deal of button smashing, the game has progressed and grown from the first iteration in other areas. It's a little bit more of a skill and finesse game than it used to be, and the supers, aerial attacks and combos for the now much wider range of characters gives this game legs on which to stand. Skilled players can totally wipe out the competition with long combos and supers, and the air attacks great longer combos for far more damage. With the PlayStation being on the way out in 2001, the next iteration of the franchise, X-Men Next Dimension, nicknamed Mutant Academy 3 by many, would be released on the PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube consoles, breaking the Sony exclusivity it had for the original pair, and would prove to be a sequel to the comic book event Operation Zero Tolerance. If you would like me to talk about this on the channel, please let me know in the comments below. Until then, there's a comprehensive history of the X-Men games up until this point on the channel, including all those legendary ones by Capcom and Konami. But let it be said, Activision has something special here at the turn of the century, and more people need to give this one a go. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button, then why not check out my video on why this Super Nintendo X-Men game was so ignored. Cheerio!